My focus will be on the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, that marvelous episode not only in church history, but in human history. The visual aids will remind us, among other things, of how many people you and I owe for their various roles in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, a book filled with plain and precious salvational truths which came forth by the gift and power of God. Through the labors of many, the marvelous work and a wonder foreseen by Isaiah restored vital truths which had been lost to mankind for centuries. We can best express our gratitude by reading and applying the teachings of the Book of Mormon. Many prophets and writers contributed to the final abridgment as various records were merged and edited. Mormon's was a monumental editing task for which we are greatly indebted. Mormon and all the other writers didn't have access to today's user-friendly word processors. Instead, they made engravings on metal plates. It was not easy. Now behold, it came to pass that I, Jacob, cannot write but a little of my words, because of the difficulty of engraving our words upon plates. Various descriptive phrases noted the constraints. Omni wrote, somewhat upon these plates. Likewise, Mormon did forbear to make a full account. Nephi told Jacob to select things which were most precious, engraving the heads of only that which was great upon these plates. Since everything could not be covered, Nephi wrote about the things of my soul. Some custodians of the ancient plates essentially passed the plates along. Ammoron, for instance, wrote in a single day the several lines he added. Abinadom was equally terse. I know of no revelation save that which has been written, neither prophecy. Wherefore that which is sufficient is written, and I make an end. However, each did his duty, caring for the sacred records, and then passing the plates along. We owe these individuals too. Periodically, some probably had to smelt ore, and it came to pass that the Lord commanded me, wherefore I did make plates of ore, that I might engraven upon them the record of my people. Late in the process, Moroni not only ran out of plates, but even ore. He also ran out of family, amid aching personal loneliness. Behold, my Father hath made this record, and he hath written the intent thereof. And behold, I would write it also, if I had room upon the plates. But I have not, and ore have I none, for I am alone. My father hath been slain in battle, and all my kinsfolk, and I have not friends nor whither to go. And how long the Lord will suffer that I may live, I know not. Moroni not only contributed his own content, but he also transported the heavy plates over undisclosed miles. These representations of metal plates are heavy. Today, the Book of Mormon and all of the standard works are contained on only 20% of this small computer disk. Quite a contrast to those heavy metal plates. The use of plates of precious metal to write upon was once scoffed at by some, but various plates made of precious metals have since been found. This is a picture of the gold and silver plates of Darius, 6th century BC, found, interestingly enough, in a stone box. Writings on thin gold plates may also be seen in a museum in Seoul, Korea. This box reportedly was used on occasion in Joseph's time to carry the Book of Mormon plates. It has come down through the Smith family to Elder Eldred Smith, who has cared for it. Carved on the lip of the box is Alvin Smith's first name. The Book of Mormon, originally translated from Reformed Egyptian into English, is now published in 84 languages. Reaching 100 languages is likely within the next several years. The most recent publication of the Book of Mormon was by the prestigious international publisher Macmillan as part of the 5-volume Encyclopedia of Mormonism. The 5th volume includes the Restoration Scriptures, the Book of Mormon, Doctrine and Covenants, and Pearl of Great Price. From the first edition in 1830 of 5,000 copies on through 1992, nearly 65 million copies are estimated to have been sold, including nearly 5 million copies in 1992. The Book of Mormon's influence will continue to grow. Wherefore these things shall go from generation to generation as long as the earth shall stand. And they shall go according to the will and pleasure of God. And the nations who shall possess them shall be judged of them, according to the words which are written. Hence, the Book of Mormon's best days still lie ahead. There are even other foretelling words, saying that the day cometh that the words of the book which were sealed shall be read upon the housetops. Joseph Smith worked by the gift and power of God amid numerous interruptions, bitter persecutions, and even the most strenuous exertions to wrest the actual plates from Joseph. Joseph was not the tranquil life of a scholar in some sheltered sanctuary where he could work at his uninterrupted leisure. Chores had to be done. His family had to be cared for. Joseph was so conscientious that the Lord counseled him, "Do not run faster or labor more than you have strength and means provided to enable you to translate, but be diligent unto the end." Why was it so vital to have another book of Scripture join the Bible? Some have called our current period in human history the post-Christian world, as if Christianity were largely over and done with. Hence, the Christ-centered nature of the Restoration message is highly relevant. While Joseph Smith's own time and location featured religious fervor among Christian sects, low here, low there, ours is a skeptical world. In nations once regarded as Christian, many are unsure or disbelieving about Christ. Thus, the Restoration is so relevant and so timely. After all, the Book of Mormon's stated purpose is for the convincing of the Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, making it such a relevant gift to the entire human family. Modern music, movies, and books reflect a growing sense of despair and disbelief. One philosopher's view of the universe was that life is of profound unimportance, a mere eddy in the primeval slime. Yet mankind is actually at the center of God's work. In fact, Nephi tells us that God doeth not anything save it be for the benefit of the world. The knowledge concerning God's plan of salvation, repeatedly and carefully set forth in the Book of Mormon, can counter the hopelessness and despair, as some lament the human predicament in which they feel mortals are conceived without consent and wrenched whimpering into an alien universe. So many desperately need to know there is divine design. No wonder the Lord told Joseph Smith, the Restoration came to increase faith in the earth. Some, however, question whether or not God can bring his purposes to fulfillment. In the Book of Mormon, the Lord assures us bluntly, 2 times in 2 verses, that I will show unto the children of men that I am able to do mine own work. Now let us focus on the coming forth of the highly relevant and reassuring Book of Mormon. Emma Smith was Joseph's early scribe. One later episode, described by Richard and Jenny Holtzapfel, illustrates Emma's dedication amid hardship. Emma Smith made her departure from far west Missouri with a group of saints on 7 February 1839. Her husband still languished in a lonesome prison in Liberty, Missouri. Emma finally arrived at the western shore of the frozen Mississippi River. Somewhat fearful of the thin ice, she separated her 2 horses and walked apart with the 2-1/2-year-old Frederick and the 8-month-old Alexander in her arms. Julia held securely to her skirt on one side and positioned young Joseph on the other side to begin to walk across the river. Emma also carried Joseph's manuscripts of his Bible translation in heavy bags, along with her husband's other personal papers fastened securely to her waist. She then walked across the frozen river to safety in Illinois. We owe Emma for her part in the Restoration. Martin Harris was also an early scribe. He helped by generously funding the first printing of the Book of Mormon, which cost him much ridicule as well as $3,000. Oliver was the devoted, able, and major scribe, but more about him later. Hyrum Smith also gave the prophet Joseph vital support and encouragement, including helping with the printer's manuscript at the press. Imagine what it would have been like if, in addition to all else he suffered, Joseph had had constant family ridicule and persecution. E.B. Grandin did the first printing of the Book of Mormon. Out of perceived necessity, Grandin's composition man, John H. Gilbert, provided needed paragraphing and punctuating. Though the printer's manuscript actually had some punctuation and a few paragraph marks, Gilbert remembered every chapter was one solid paragraph without a punctuation mark from beginning to end. The few surviving portions of the original manuscript contain no punctuation. This is a first edition of the Book of Mormon. Its pages reflect the almost solid blocks of print. Joseph personally amended the 1837 and 1840 editions, but almost all were grammatical changes and clarifications. In the 1840 edition, a few scribal errors were corrected, such as were made in copying the printer's manuscript from the original. The very rapidity of the translation process accounts for some of these errors. Of course, it was the Book of Mormon's scriptural substance and doctrinal richness that really mattered, not its mortal punctuation, paragraphing, or even spelling. Given its unique importance, it is not surprising that ever since the Book of Mormon was published in 1830, disbelievers and detractors have preferred any explanation of its coming forth to the real one. This disdain was foreseen by the Lord, who consoled Joseph. Behold, if they will not believe my words, they would not believe you, my servant Joseph, if it were possible that you should show them all these things which I have committed unto you. Apparently, even if skeptics had been shown the Urim and Thummim and the plates, it would not have convinced them. Besides, Reformed Egyptian is a language none other people knoweth. One early enemy of the church, E.D. Howe, mistakenly assigned the authorship of the Book of Mormon to Reverend Spalding, who died in 1816, 14 years before the Book of Mormon was published. The Spalding explanation once caused such a needless stir. It is actually amusing to compare Spalding's story to the Book of Mormon. Others said Sidney Rigdon, who first met Joseph after the Book of Mormon was already published, authored the Book of Mormon, something Brother Rigdon never claimed. In more recent years, another explanation has been advanced. Joseph Smith supposedly took his main ideas, say these critics, from the writings of one Ethan Smith, who wrote a book called View of the Hebrews. But comparing Ethan Smith's book, View of the Hebrews, with the Book of Mormon isn't fair either to Ethan or to Joseph Smith. Ethan Smith described his purpose forthrightly. Other and similar societies in favor of the Jews are becoming numerous. My present object is rather to attend to the present state of the 10 tribes of Israel. The Book of Mormon, of course, is not an account of the 10 tribes of Israel. One would no more read Ethan's book for doctrine than he would read the telephone directory in search of a plot. Trying to compare Spalding's story or the View of the Hebrews with the Book of Mormon is like trying to make something of the similarities in the musical notes used in both Chopsticks and Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. However, the attacks on and the efforts to undermine the Book of Mormon will doubtless continue. Those who cannot explain it will try to diminish it in any way they can. Understandably, most of us still desire to know more about the Book of Mormon's coming forth, including its actual process of translation. This was certainly so with faithful and loyal Hyrum. Upon inquiring, Hyrum was told by the prophet Joseph that it was not intended to tell the world all the particulars of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. It was not expedient for him to relate these things. Thus, what we do know about the actual coming forth of the Book of Mormon is adequate, but it is not definitive. The real focus on the Book of Mormon should be on the details of the book itself, not on the process by which it came forth. After all, even though we do not know everything about the process of its coming forth or its translation. The Book of Mormon is open to full scrutiny. Since the coming forth of the Book of Mormon amply fulfilled what Isaiah prophesied centuries ago would be a marvelous work and a wonder, let us consider some dimensions of how marvelous and wondrous it is. The prophet Joseph was deliberately reluctant to describe details. He alone knew the full process. So we take passing notice of the words of David Whitmer, Joseph Knight, and Martin Harris, who were observers, not translators. Whitmer indicated that by using the divine instrumentalities, the hieroglyphics would appear and also the translation in the English language in bright, luminous letters. Joseph would read the words off to Oliver. Martin Harris related of the seerstone, sentences would appear and were read by the prophet and written by Martin. Joseph Knight made similar observations. Oliver Cowdery is reported to have testified in court that the Urim and Thummim enabled Joseph to read in English the reformed Egyptian characters which were engraved on the plates. If these reports are accurate, they suggest a process indicative of God's having given Joseph sight and power to translate. If, by means of these divine instrumentalities, the prophet was seeing ancient words rendered in English and then dictating, Joseph was not simultaneously and constantly scrutinizing the characters on the actual plates, the usual process of going back and forth between pondering an ancient text and providing a modern rendering. The revelatory process apparently did not require the prophet to become expert in the ancient language. The revelatory process was more crucial than the constant presence of open plates, which, by instruction, were to be kept from the view of unauthorized eyes anyway. While the use of divine instrumentalities might also account for the rapid rate of translation, the prophet may have used a less mechanical procedure. We simply do not know the details. One can readily see, given the remarkability of the process, why Joseph was reluctant to describe details to his brother Hiram or to anyone else. The faith-filled process was not easy, however. This fact was clearly demonstrated in Oliver Cowdery's own attempt at translation. Oliver failed when he tried to translate because he did not continue as he commenced, and because lacking faith in works, he took no thought save it was to ask. He just couldn't do it. Even so, we owe so much to Oliver Cowdery for his marvelous service as a scribe. Whatever the details of the process, it required Joseph's intense personal efforts along with the aid of the revelatory instruments. Moreover, the process itself may have varied as Joseph's capabilities grew, alternately involving Urim and Thummim, the seer stone, perhaps with less reliance upon such instrumentalities in Joseph's later work of translation. Orson Pratt said Joseph Smith told him that he used the Urim and Thummim when he was inexperienced at translation, but later he did not need it, as was the case in Joseph's translation of many verses of the Bible. Some additional things we know about the process of translation further qualify it as a marvelous work and a wonder. One marvel is the very rapidity with which Joseph was translating, at an estimated average rate of 7 to 10 of our printed pages per day. Total working time was about 65 to 75 working days. One able LDS translator in Japan, while surrounded by reference books, language dictionaries, and with translator colleagues available if needed, recently indicated that he considers an output of 1 careful final page a day to be productive. And he is retranslating from earlier Japanese to modern Japanese. Over 50 able English scholars labored for 7 years using previous translations to produce the precious King James Bible, thus averaging about 1 precious page per day. The prophet would sometimes average 10 pages per day. Second, from what we know, rarely would Joseph go back, review, or revise what he had already translated. These enlarged photos of sample pages of the original Book of Mormon manuscript reflect a steady flow. The prophet's dictating flowed, resulting just as the compositor John H. Gilbert remembered, with no paragraphing. This is the end part of 1 Nephi chapter 4 and the beginning of 1 Nephi chapter 5, about one of our printed pages. Notice the steady flow of words and the lowercase pronoun I, reflecting the scribe's characteristic way of writing. Next is a portion of the 32nd chapter of Alma, which contains such significant words about faith. Note the flow, but also how the scribe first wrote life, which was then immediately corrected to read light. The process not only flowed, but it flowed at a very rapid rate under the gift and power of God. If one were manufacturing, he would constantly need to cross-check himself, to edit, and to revise for consistency. Had the prophet thus dictated and revised extensively, there would have been more evidence of it. Thus, whatever the details of the process, we are discussing an astonishing process. Furthermore, Emma Smith said of the inspired process, after meals or after interruptions, Joseph would at once begin where he had left off, without either seeing the manuscript or having any portion of it read to him. Usually one who has been dictating and has been interrupted must resume by inquiring, now where were we? Not so with the prophet. Martin Harris is quoted as saying, a blanket being hung between himself and Joseph. Perhaps this occurred when the prophet was copying characters directly from the plates in the sample to be taken to Professor Anthon, since the dates mentioned are several months before Martin Harris's brief scribal duties began. David Whitmer mentions a blanket being used, but only to partition off the living area in order to keep both the translator and the scribe from the eyes of visitors. However, Elizabeth Ann Whitmer Cowdery said, Joseph never had a curtain drawn between him and his scribe. Emma likewise said of her days as a scribe early on, that Joseph dictated hour after hour with nothing between us. Of course, the real revelatory process involved Joseph's mind and faith, which could not be seen by others in any case. Third, though translating an ancient record, Joseph himself was clearly unschooled in things ancient. For example, he came across the words concerning a wall around Jerusalem and asked Emma if there were walls around Jerusalem. She affirmed. Joseph simply hadn't known. He knew nothing either of the literary form called chiasmus, which appears in the Bible at various places and, significantly, which also appears in the Book of Mormon. Fourth, none of the 12 people who either participated or who merely observed mentions Joseph's having had any reference materials present. Since the prophet dictated openly, these individuals would have been aware of any suspicious behavior or procedures. Emma was emphatic on this very point, saying, he had neither manuscript nor book to read from. If he had had anything of the kind, he could not have concealed it from me. Emma does mention, and so does David Whitmer, the prophet spelling out unfamiliar names. Thus the Book of Mormon came through and not from Joseph Smith. There is need for care in suggesting the prophet had great flexibility as to doctrine and the substance of the language he used. This may be gauged by Joseph's emphatic words about the title page of the Book of Mormon. Of that page, Joseph Smith on one occasion said that the title page of the Book of Mormon is a literal translation, taken from the very last leaf on the left-hand side of the collection or book of plates, which contain the record which has been translated, the language of the whole running the same as all Hebrew writing in general, and that said title page is not by any means a modern composition either of mine or of any other man's who has lived or does live in this generation. Oliver Cowdery was the most constant and involved witness to the miraculous translation process. He always affirmed the divinity of the process. Though later disaffected for a time from the church, Oliver Cowdery nevertheless came humbly back. he spoke forthrightly about how he wrote with my own pen the entire Book of Mormon, save a few pages, as it fell from the lips of the prophet. Oliver would not have humbly returned to the church at all, especially seeking no station, had there been any kind of fraud. Instead, even given his several years of disaffection, Oliver's testimony, speaking of the saints who by then had gone west, was that there was no salvation but in the valley and through the priesthood there. At the time of his readmission, Oliver bore testimony of the Book of Mormon in the same manner as is recorded in the testimony of the three witnesses, of whom he was one. At the approach of death, Oliver Cowdery couldn't have been more dramatic concerning the Book of Mormon. Of this experience, Oliver's half-sister said, just before he breathed his last, Oliver asked to be raised up in bed so that he could talk to the family and friends, and he told them to live according to the teachings in the Book of Mormon, and they would meet him in heaven. Then he said, lay me down and let me fall asleep in the arms of Jesus, and he fell asleep without a struggle. What an exit endorsement. The book's spiritual significance, of course, lies in its capacity for convincing Jew and Gentile that Jesus is the Christ. This is the very same reason given by the Apostle John. But these are written that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye might have life through his name. This is why prophets write, whether John, Nephi, Mormon, or Moroni. In 1829, especially while going at an average rate that would produce 7 to 10 printed pages a day, Joseph would not have fully or immediately comprehended all the powerful and enhancing verses which were passing through him. One example of this is Alma chapter 7, verses 11 and 12, which represent a powerful addition to our understanding of Jesus' suffering and of his atonement, and why Jesus' empathy for each of us is perfect and very personal. Jesus understands the full range of human suffering. Such insights were beyond Joseph Smith in 1829. Likewise, in translating the substance of Alma chapter 13, verse 3, Joseph Smith was encountering, for the first time as far as we know, the doctrines of God's foreknowledge, man's premortal existence, and God's use of foreordination. Did Joseph fully and immediately understand all the implications of that verse, which overturned the false doctrine of predestination? Bright as Joseph was, clearly he was involved with insights which he could not then have fully or immediately comprehended. Since the plates had been so carefully assembled, edited, and preserved by God, the plates were surely not destined to serve as a mere catalyst. Hence, the rifling of Joseph's mind did not result in a trifling with divinely given doctrines. This observation is no discredit to Joseph Smith. On the contrary, King Benjamin's words were not his either, but had been delivered unto him by the angel of the Lord. Similarly, Nephi said his words are the words of Christ, and he hath given them unto me. Further illustrating this particular point, the prophet Joseph Smith, while translating, especially if asked by the scribe, would spell, letter by letter, certain proper names. For instance, in his scribal duties, Oliver Cowdery first wrote the name Coriantumr phonetically. Oliver then immediately crossed out his phonetic spelling and spelled the name as we now have it in the Book of Mormon. Coriantumr, with its MR ending, clearly would have required a letter-by-letter spelling out by the prophet. Why do we not have more disclosure concerning the process of translation? Perhaps because we would not be ready to understand it even if given. Perhaps, too, because the Lord wants to leave the Book of Mormon in the realm of faith, though it is drenched with intrinsic evidence. Perhaps, too, because we are intended to immerse ourselves in the substance of the book rather than becoming unduly concerned with the process of its translation. In any case, as soon as the translation process was completed, it was necessary for the prophet Joseph to move on quickly in his very busy and highly compressed ministry. This ministry included retranslating hundreds of verses in the Bible, fully establishing the church, receiving various keys and heavenly messengers, with each of whom came new duties and new concerns, leading the winnowing Zion's camp march, and calling and training many of the church leaders, including the 12 and others, as in the school of prophets. Notably, the prophet Joseph sent 9 of the 12 to England when he could least afford to send them. Joseph also continued receiving various revelations. He oversaw large gatherings of church members in Kirtland, Jackson County, and Nauvoo. He experienced the awful and severe apostasy among members, especially in the Kirtland period and in Nauvoo. On one occasion, Wilford Woodruff reported he met Joseph in Kirtland, shook his hand, and for a moment the prophet said nothing. Then the prophet said, "Brother Woodruff, I am glad to see you. I hardly know when I meet those who have been my brethren in the Lord, who of them are my friends. They have become so scarce." All of this and so much more combined to form Joseph's remarkable ministry. He finally focused on temple building and temple ordinances, in many ways the crowning achievement of the prophet's life. The prophet Joseph did all of these and so much more while serving simultaneously as father and husband. He and Emma lost 6 of their children to early death. Finally, of course, came the engulfing events leading up to the martyrdom. So many large undertakings were compressed into such a small period of time. The prophet's ministry almost defies description. No wonder Joseph once said that if he hadn't experienced his own life, he would hardly have believed it. Yes, the precious Book of Mormon came through, not from Joseph the seer. Yes, it came to him by the gift and power of God. But though it was not his book, Joseph was its remarkable translator. It was actually the book of prophets who had long before preceded him. By means of his intensive labors of translation, Joseph has let these prophets speak so eloquently for themselves to millions of us. More printed pages of Scripture have come to us through Joseph Smith than from any other human. Near the end of his ministry, with so much betrayal about him, the prophet Joseph said to members, "I never told you I was perfect, but there is no error in the revelations which I have taught." This summational statement includes the marvelous Book of Mormon, the coming forth of which we have examined briefly. I bear apostolic witness of Jesus, the great Redeemer of all mankind. It was he who called the prophet Joseph Smith, tutored him, and nurtured him through Joseph's adversities, which were to be but a small moment. Once the prophet Joseph hoped aloud that he might so live amid his suffering that one day he could take his place among Abraham and the ancients, hoping to hold an even weight in the balances with them. Joseph so triumphed, which is why we can rightly sing of Joseph's being crowned in the midst of the prophets of old. I so testify of this in the holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen.